Anxiety Artist. This is Miss A. I'm here introducing a series of videos. So for this series of videos, I'm interviewing a variety of people. Most of these people were my ex-students. Some of them are practicing artists that I've met along the way. And really, these videos are here to inspire you. They are here to show you where you can take your art education. Not all of you will become artists, but I feel that, art is really, really important no matter what you end up doing later on in life. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you really, really enjoy these. Thank you for subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting. That inspires us to do more videos that are hopefully of interest to you. This is Miss A. All the best.
Hi, I'm Jeff Brown. I am a computer graphics artist and animator. By day, I frequently do commercial computer animation. And by night, sometimes I do commercial computer animation because animation can take a long time. But I also do fine art work. And fine art is kind of a nebulous term, maybe. Philosophical art. Art with no direct commercial purpose. And anyway, that I have done recently interactive video sculpture, which has been shown at a few maker fairs up and down the East Coast in the US. I have done recently, I'm working on 2 different related series of large photographs, which a couple of those have been accepted into the Philadelphia area Woodmere Annual at the Woodmere Museum. The Woodmere Annual 2020, but since I am speaking to you in the time of coronavirus, the Woodmere Annual 2020, much like the Olympics, will turn into the Woodmere Annual 2021. But I do have a couple large photographs that will be appearing in that. Those are pieces which originated on film, old analog film, color work, C41 if you're into geeky details the way I am. And they've been scanned. I typically scan them at these are medium format negatives, which are scanned at a very high resolution so I can do large prints. And then they're combined with different computer-generated elements to produce a photographic painting, one might say, or just a slightly surrealistic scene, something of compositing. Not a terribly new thing these days, not a terribly new thing in photography, actually, but I've always liked a little bit of surrealism, or walking along the edge of the uncanny valley, as it were. Other work was interactive video sculpture. That was the previous major piece I did, which was video mapping projection onto 3D printed plastic terrain of a mountain in Alaska, where the viewer or user could control the climate, in a sense. You could control the daylight, the clouds, and the wind by turning various knobs on. A whole exhibit was housed in a replica of a radio from around 1920, 1925 that was built to house the video projector and hide the workings of it, so it looked more holographic. But anyway, that's who I am. Goodness, and I started doing computer animation on personal computers almost 30 years ago. I know. Yikes. And at the time, most people that had started doing computer animation were working on very large, very expensive workstations. They cost multiple tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars. I couldn't do what those studios could do. But then again, about 5 years later, most of those studios were out of business because they could no longer afford the lease payments, since personal computers had caught up with the workstation computers and actually surpassed them in a lot of ways. I won't say I was prescient enough to see that coming. I was just kind of lucky I couldn't afford a big computer system and had to start with PCs. And as we know now, personal computers do almost everything you can do on your desktop, or at least linked into the cloud, which is actually commercially how I expand things these days. If I need more machines, typically in animation, there's the creation process, and then there is the rendering process. And rendering can take hours and hours. If you're doing feature work, it can take hours and hours per frame, and you need 24, 30 frames for every second, so it adds up. These days, there are a couple different cloud services I use personally, and therefore, in my little studio here in my attic, I do have a nice setup. As you can see, bits of it around me, monitors, software, yada yada. But if I need a few dozen extra computers, then I can just rent them by the hour, which is a nice savings because, oddly enough, for animation, the computing power has increased the same way it's increased for everything else, but the software has just gotten more complicated, and so still eats up every processor cycle you can throw at it. So it still takes a long time to render out final pieces. That's changing. Real time is probably the way of the future. So if you're in high school, if you're in college, learn how to do real time work. That's what's going to happen totally within the next 10 years. Nobody's going to render out things. Probably even feature films won't be rendering out to individual frames anymore. We'll see. I'm not perfect futurist, but that certainly seems to be the way it's going now. Well, in my case, I did not have very much art education in high school. I was actually in more of a science track, sort of maybe potentially pre-med. I know that's not a real thing in high school, but concentrated very heavily on chemistry, math, and physics, with a bit of history and literature in there. Now, being at a public school in the U.S. in the late mid 20th century, shall we say, in the 70s, 1970s for you kids out there, there was really not. There was a little bit of art curriculum. Unfortunately, not a very strong art offering in the public schools, which had it been there and been a rigorous program and required at least somewhat for students, I think I would have had a better head start, and I might have figured out that I was much more interested in photography and visual art than I actually was in physics. I think if it's done well and done rigorously, art education in high school can help people learn, one, if they have a certain passion for the arts or a love for the arts or a response to visual things as opposed to a response to numbers or literature. But I think also, especially in high school, it can educate students to the fact that to do art well is very difficult. It's a different kind of difficult than doing algebra well or writing well. Visual art is certainly different than doing music well, but in any of these disciplines, to do things well is difficult, or at least takes a lot of work. Looking at the artists I admire, one, they work tremendously hard, and also they work tremendously hard at things other than art as well. So I guess this is a corollary I have to my thinking about art education, is that it can't be in a vacuum. the same way that science and engineering can't be in a vacuum. I think if we're looking at students and looking to do the best we can for the greatest number of students, I think they should all be exposed to science, technology, engineering, math, art, literature, and history. STEM education is a big deal currently. Certainly in the States, I think in Europe also. But I think that's misguided because everybody should be getting that. Everybody should be getting a good background in literature, and everybody should be getting a good background in art, especially as a young person, unless you happen to be the equivalent of Mozart and know what you're doing from the age of 5, I think a broad exposure to all disciplines is only going to be beneficial. As I said, the artists I admire work very hard at their art, and they frequently work very hard in other disciplines or learning about other disciplines. I don't think everybody has to be a Renaissance person, but certainly one would need a good foundation in selected literature. And if you're addressing things in your art which are contemporary, such as climate change, I think you need a reasonable grounding in science so you can distinguish conspiracy theories from facts. So my argument is that art is a wonderful and necessary part of an education, but only as part of a very broad education, which includes all disciplines, at least through the younger years. And younger, I'm speaking of, under 20 years old. As it happened, I tested really well in high school. I was a very compliant student. I was a very good student. And I ended up going to a pretty respected college. And when I got there as an undergraduate, I was in the midst of, 700 other people that had also been very good students at their schools. And because of the lack of rigor and somewhat restrictiveness of at least the public school I went to in the States, I was not really prepared to compete. Not that I really had to compete, but I wasn't prepared to work as hard as I found I needed to work. And that is something that I think art education can actually have a huge impact on if it's done right. If you're studying art, and I hope all of the high school students are studying art at least a bit, if only to know that they don't really find a connection with it, well, that'll happen. But to know that it's not all about just expressing raw emotion on a piece of paper, which in elementary school, where I was, and even somewhat in high school, there was maybe a little too much of that, and not enough of teaching people how to see things accurately, drawing as a very foundational thing. So if you're studying art in high school and nobody's teaching you how to draw well, find someone who will. The good stuff comes from the hard work. And just looking back on my experience, some of the art education was not, I'll use the word again, not very rigorous in high school and earlier. Well, earlier, you're kids, so you should play. If you're in elementary school, art should be maybe the most fun time of the day. Get messy, go crazy. But in high school, I think is a very good time to teach people, teach students how to see things accurately, which means learning to draw in a very basic sense, in a very academic sense. And it's not easy. It's something you will gain an appreciation for how hard it can be to draw a good form. I am not a very good draftsperson. I can produce a credible figure drawing if I warm up for a while, but I do have at least some idea of perspective, atmospheric perspective, geometric perspective, the basic things, tone, all those sorts of things that go into making images. But it really does, even in photography, even in digital art, or maybe especially in digital art, it does come down to some facility with drawing. I think it's extremely important that high school students, especially those who think they may be pursuing more concentrated studies in art, that they get a really good grasp of learning how to draw what's in front of them. It's kind of the basic thing. And in fact, even in digital art, there is a very common refrain among people hiring in companies that if you can draw, they can teach you how to use the software. If you know drawing, if you know form, if you know in animation, kinetic movement and a sense of pacing and of story, well, they can teach you how to use the software. That's just kind of what buttons to push. It's much easier to teach somebody a computer program than it is to teach someone how to draw. So if you have great skills in gaming, if you have great skills in programming, that could be one avenue. But if you're looking to create art, create visuals in a digital way, then don't skip the drawing. And the painting is a pretty good secondary thing for learning color and tone. That being said, also, if you're studying art in high school, make sure you study some literature and some science and some math. You'll need to know these things. Study it all. Study it as much as you can. And try to enjoy it whenever possible. Thanks. Good luck to you all. Bye.